Hi guys, welcome to our last video looking at complex inheritance patterns in genetics. So where we are going to wrap up this section of our genetics unit is by looking at polygenic and multiple alleles. So these are just kind of another way, as we've said and been working with, for us to see sort of how genetics is not necessarily a single gene with two versions or two alleles where one's covering up the others. There's lots of complexities that comes beyond just that simple pattern of inheritance. And we'll be looking at just two more today, so polygenic and multiple alleles. Polygenic is one of those beautiful terms that essentially tells you what it is. So, for example, if you guys have taken like geometry, you've looked at polygons or many-sided figures. Poly as a prefix means many, and genic refers to genes. So polygenic traits mean any trait that is controlled by many genes. So this, for example, and we'll look at a couple examples kind of more visually, like for example, eye color, skin color, things where we see a lot of gradient variation. That's because it's not just a single gene that's controlling for this. A lot of pigmented or colored sort of proteins inside of our body are polygenic. So again, that explains why we see sort of a huge variation. If we look at kind of eye color, this is one of the ones where I get a lot of questions over the years with eye color because it is a little funky and because we typically use brown versus blue as kind of like a beginner genetics like intro when you're first learning to do Punnett squares. And so then all the people with like green eyes are like, what's going on? And some people are like, oh, this parent has this color eyes and this color eyes. So what is happening? Well, kind of let's demystify eye color a little bit. Eye color is a polygenic trait. There's actually two recognized different genes. So these are different genes, different chromosomes that actually contribute to what we see in your phenotype as your eye color. The first one is called the HERK2 gene. Now, the HERK2 gene helps with brown versus blue, and it does follow simple dominant recessive inheritance. So you'll notice kind of if you look at my charts over here, individuals that inherit at least one copy of the brown allele for HERK2 do have brown eyes. And you need to be homozygous recessive for that gene in order to have a chance of having either blue or green eyes. Now, the interesting thing is that green, if you look at your second gene, which is the gay gene, this one actually shows green versus blue. And this one is actually green is dominant over blue, which most people are surprised by. They're like, but there's not that many green-eyed people in the world, so what's going on? Well, you are actually noticing what's known as population genetics. So while green is dominant over blue, what we find is if we were to look at the alleles in the population, so kind of count up how many of these green alleles are in the population, especially in like the US and this region, we would find there's not nearly as many green alleles as there are blue alleles. So that means your chance of finding another person where you are only giving blue alleles and they have one of those green alleles is not very high. So that's why we don't see a ton of people with green eyes. We see more often people with blue eyes. That blue-eyed allele is a lot more common in the general population. Now, one of the themes that we'll see that holds true is when you look at kind of the gradients that you can get in eye color, this has to do with kind of protein expression. So you'll find that there's a little bit of an environmental component here when it comes to darkening and lightening kind of even within the general color. But a general rule, and this is what we tend to find kind of holding over when we look at skin color, is that dominant alleles for pigments like in skin and eye color are going to lead to greater pigment expression. So kind of transitioning over from eye color to skin color, and also this holds true for dog coats as well. Both of those are color, human skin color and dog coat color are both pigmented genes. Now in human skin, we produce a specific pigment called melanin. And so melanin is essentially how much of this protein you express determines sort of how dark your skin color is. And so we notice that the more dominant copies of the three genes that we see, which are just nicely, easily labeled here as A, B, and C, that you inherit in some combinations, the more of this melanin pigment your skin is going to create, and sort of the darker your natural skin color would be. And so this is why we see, again, two individuals kind of with intermediate skin colors can have children that maybe have more pigment expression than them or less pigment expression, just on base that random genetics of are they getting maybe mom's and dad's dominant copies or recessive copies. The next and last one we'll look at are what are known as multiple alleles. So with polygenic traits, this is where there are multiple genes, so multiple locations on a chromosome that are coding for and making proteins that result in a single phenotype. So for example, with skin color, it is three different genes making three different proteins that give the one thing we see, which is melanin production. Multiple alleles is a little bit different. This is where we're still talking about one gene, but there are more than two versions of this gene. So we have up until now, kind of if you think about Mendelian genetics, there's been a dominant represented by a capital letter and a recessive represented by a lowercase letter. With multiple alleles, it would be like, let's, add 2 or 3 more versions onto that. The important thing with this is that organisms are still diploid for this gene. We're still talking about a single gene, and you are still diploid, meaning that even if there were 10 versions of what a gene could be, individuals themselves still only get 2 of those letters being diploid. It just means there's more options for what those 2 letters could be. One of the examples for this is actually something we already looked at. Blood type follows multiple alleles. So for example, you could have type A blood. So there's an A version of this blood typing, there is a B version, and there's an O version. So that shows you right there that we get 3 different genes or 3 different codes that kind of give us our blood type. AB right here would not be considered another allele. That is a codominance, remember? So where you're seeing that A and B protein. But what we're talking about with multiple alleles is they've given you a nice kind of visual here. The green spikes would be your phenotype for one. The blue circles would be your phenotype for another. And the lack of those would be a third allele or third version of the gene. Rabbits also follow multiple alleles. So for example, there is one gene that codes for fur color in rabbits, but there's information for making white fur, black fur, kind of agouti fur. Here you have sort of butterscotch coloring. So we notice there's lots of different versions for what could be on there. Same thing with hair color. So hair color has lots of different versions and lots of different variation to it as well. So we can have black hair, we can have brown hair, we can have red hair, we can have blonde hair. So those are multiple alleles or multiple versions of the gene that give you that coloring. What you guys are going to do right now, so again, super quick on this one, is on the bottom of page 27, you guys have a practice problem working with this, and it'll show you some of the notation. Go ahead and give that practice problem a shot.